just a couple little things I want to talk about as far as some background for today's story. We all have heard have heard the name the Chaldeans. And so I want to talk just a little bit about them. Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and that is a key point. That's what this chapter is all about, is this dream. And so first, to go back about the Chaldeans, the Chaldeans are mentioned, are referred to, and play, are key players at different times with stories throughout the Old Testament. So at one time, they were a pretty rowdy group, as far as, being warriors and that kind of stuff. In Daniel, they have settled into this role within the Babylonian Empire of being sort of like the wise men. And there's some folks that wonder if the wise men from the book of Matthew and Jesus' birth story may have been Chaldeans. Matthew doesn't say, but there's some wonder if they might have been Chaldeans, because they were quite knowledgeable about astronomy and astrology. They had kept detailed records for like 360 years, as far as their record keeping about different things. So just to give you a sort of little insight about the Chaldeans. And then as well, during this time in the Babylonian Empire, and this is based on historical records from Babylon and stuff, dreams and dream interpretation were a big part of their culture and their society. And apparently there were a number of reference works specifically for that purpose of covering just about every scenario you could come up with, as far as the kinds of dreams people would have and how to interpret those dreams. All right, so to give a little bit of background to that. All right, so if you guys have books, if you'll turn to page 31, or if you're in the Bible, just the second book of Daniel. And the passage for today is 3 pages long in our book. Is it written by Chaldeans?
Well, it's written in English, so I'm not sure.
Oh, interpreted.
The things I have on my bookshelf.
So you're gonna have to read this. You have to look up and see if this dream is in there. All right, so because it's a long passage, we're gonna break this up and try talking about it a little bit. So we'll see how this goes. All right. So if somebody would read, and first of all, let me back up to chapter 1, a couple of things. Everybody remembers Daniel and his 3 buddies, right? We all know the names of the 3 buddies with their new names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Can anybody say what their Jewish names were?
Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah.
Very good. All right, of course, now, yeah, cool. All right, because the 3 friends are in this story. Next week, they are the main characters in next week's story, because next week is the fiery furnace. All right. So, all right. Then we also touched on last week about the similarities between these stories about Daniel and, does anybody remember it? And Sarah already knows the answer to this one, but does anybody remember who the other person from the Old Testament, that there are a lot of similarities between his story and Daniel's story? Oh, dead silence.
Joseph?
Yes, Claire.
I was beginning to think nobody paid attention last week.
Yes, so there's a lot of similarities between in Daniel's story and Joseph's story, but today we're also going to look at some differences as well. There are some little differences at the end of the passage. So as we're reading this, I want you to be thinking about what you hear is the similarities between Joseph, when he was in Egypt and with the Pharaoh and his work with the Pharaoh, and Daniel and his relationship with Nebuchadnezzar. Okay. All right. Okay. So, and then there, as a class, we haven't done Isaiah, but there also are, there's a number of chapters or a section of Isaiah, chapters 40 through 55, that the imagery and some of the themes and stuff, there's a lot of similarities between that passage, those passages in Isaiah, and then Daniel as well. So some theological similarities. So we'll be talking about that a little bit today too. All right. Okay. So if somebody would read verses 1 through 11.
I got it.
We're gonna need several folks to read, so y'all get ready. Okay.
Okay, here goes. In the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed such dreams that his spirit was troubled and his sleep left him. So the king commanded that the magicians, the enchanters, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans be summoned to tell the king his dreams. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, I have had such a dream that my spirit is troubled and the desire to understand it. The Chaldeans said to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will reveal the interpretation. The king answered the Chaldeans, this is a public decree. If you do not tell me both the dream and its interpretation, you shall be torn limb from limb, and your houses shall be laid in ruins. But if you do tell me the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive gifts from me and rewards and great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream and its interpretation. They answered a second time, let the king first tell his servants the dream, then we can give its interpretation. The king answered, I know with certainty that you are trying to gain time, because you see I have firmly decreed, if you do not tell me the dream, there is but one verdict for you. You have agreed to speak lying and misleading words to me until things take a turn. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can give me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king, there is no one on earth who can reveal what the king demands. In fact, no king, however great and powerful, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or Chaldean. The thing that the king is asking is too difficult, and no one can reveal it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with mortals.
Woo! All right. So how would you characterize Nebuchadnezzar's demand?
I think it indicates
Indications.
he has no faith in his advisors and is just giving him an out as a way to get rid of him. That's my impression.
Okay. All right.
Not
All
that
right.
kings needed an excuse back then. They could just do what they wanted, but
True. All right. Anybody else's thoughts on Nebuchadnezzar and his?
I think he was so troubled that he needed a way to make sure that they were the real deal and he was getting the correct information.
Yeah, I wondered if this dream was so troubling to him that he wanted somebody to take care of this problem for him, that he was so uncomfortable, maybe.
But even with Joseph, the king told him what the dream was. I mean, he's wanting them to tell him what the dream was as well as what its interpretation was. So I wonder if Joseph could have done that.
Right. Yeah, that's so Susan's got a good point, good one of those first comparisons, that for Joseph, the Pharaoh, he's told him his dream. So,
Yeah, I
all
kind of
right.
agree with Sarah. This is like there's no win for this. It's just like you're just setting someone up to fail so you can do with them what you want.
Right. Right. Yep. Yep. All right. So all these wise sages tell the king that what you're asking is too difficult. No one can do this except the gods. Little, remember that, whose dwelling is not with mortals. So a theological point there. All right. All right. So next section, verses 12. Whoops. 12 through 16. Somebody would read that.
Okay. Because of this, the king flew into a violent rage and commanded that all the wise men of Babylon be destroyed. The decree was issued, and the wise men were about to be executed, and they looked for Daniel and his companions to execute them. Then Daniel responded with prudence and discretion to Arioch, the king's chief executioner, who had gone out to execute the wise men of Babylon. He said, Arioch, the royal official, why is the decree of the king so urgent? And Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. So Daniel went in and requested that the king give him time and he would tell the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went to his home and informed his companions, and their Jewish names, and told them to seek mercy from God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that Daniel and his companions with the rest of the wise men of Babylon might not perish.
Okay, let's stop there. Okay. All right. So all the wise men were being rounded up, and including Daniel and his buddies, and they didn't even know what was going on. So asking for what was happening. And so they got so Daniel got filled in on what was happening. And then Daniel went in and asked for the king's time, and that he would give the interpretation. So, which was a pretty gutsy thing that you would have, we don't know whether he asked the king directly, but it went in and made that request.
Well, if you're going to be killed, what do you have to lose?
True. All right. So then what happens? Daniel then goes back to his home, talks to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and asks them to do what?
Pray, basically, I guess. Seek mercy from God.
Yep, to pray for them, for the four of them, as well as who else?
All the other wise
All the
men.
other wise men.
Yep, that there are other wise men of, so another important theological statement there. All right.
And one thing the book points out is that Daniel is still, and his friends, they're still students. It's a 3-year course of study, and this is the 2nd year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign.
Right. So they're only about halfway through, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So I'm surprised that anybody would even think the students were worth bothering with. They're just trainees.
Right. But they're being included in the group that's to be killed.
Yeah.
Yep. They're being pulled into that. Yep. Okay. So then, all right. So then the next part, as far as, so verses 19 through 24, I'm sorry, 19 through 24. Would somebody like to read that?
I'll read it.
Okay.
That night, the secret was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven, saying, "Praise the name of God forever and ever, for he alone has all wisdom and power. He determines the course of world events. He removes kings and sets others on the throne. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the scholars. He reveals deep and mysterious things and knows what lies hidden in darkness, though he himself is surrounded by light. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors, for you have given me wisdom and strength. You have told me what we asked of you and revealed to us what the king demanded. Through 20, you want me to keep reading or that's 24?
Yeah, through 24.
Okay. Then Daniel went in to see Arioch, who had been ordered to execute the wise men of Babylon. Daniel said to him, "Don't kill the wise men. Take me to the king, and I will tell him the meaning of his dream."
Okay, so this, the blessing that Daniel gives, all right, that's listed here, is a doxology. And doxology means what? It's a song of,
Praise.
yeah, a song of praise. So the doxology we sing on Sunday morning is just one of many doxologies. There are several other doxologies through the Bible, and this is one of them. So Daniel right, so going back to, so Daniel in his doxology makes a number of theological statements, all right? But going back to the Chaldeans or Chaldeans, as Sarah was saying, what was their theological statement that I said a minute ago? All right, look back at verse 11. The thing that the king is asking is too difficult, and no one can reveal it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with mortals. All right. So for the Chaldeans is saying God's far away. He's not here with us. The gods aren't here with us. Whereas Daniel's theology, he's saying what? Where is God from Daniel's perspective?
Right there with him.
Present and listening.
Present and listening. Yep. So the author of our book, I'm going to pronounce it Sal. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. S-E-O-W, so I'm going to say Sal. Anyhow, he's saying that Daniel's saying that he's present and listening, that he's also the God in heaven, but he's also the God who's present and listening. So that Daniel is striking that balance between the two. He's also, giving us some hints about this upcoming dream interpretation. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. All right. So Daniel's covering a lot of territory in this one song or a doxology. Sal talks a lot about, talks a good amount about the phrase name of God, because that is a phrasing that is used pretty often in the Old Testament. All right. And I hadn't really thought about it before, but it is. So in verse 20, Daniel said, "Blessed be the name of God from age to age." So that frame, name of God, and other parts of the Bible, in Psalms, it might say, praise the name of the Lord, sing praises to his name, give thanks to the name of the Lord. So in the tradition of Deuteronomy, name of the Lord is a way to set that presence of God in the temple that's beyond any other God. And remember, it also, for much of the early Jewish history, you didn't say the name of God. So to refer to God, to the name of God, it's a way of referring to the presence of God that does not compromise the notion of radical transcendence, though that notion of him being present with us. So that, in the theology of the Jews and through the Old Testament, this is important stuff. to refer to God, the name of the Lord, the name of God, sing praises to the name of God. All right, so there also is, Daniel, qualities that were, the Babylonians ascribed to Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel is saying in this psalm, these are God's qualities. All right, so making that distinction between God and Nebuchadnezzar. All right. He also talks about in verse 21, he changes times and seasons, deposes kings and set up kings. So so I wondered how you guys, what y'all's thoughts were about that, as far as that it's God's doing, as far as setting up these kings like in Babylon and the succession of kings, because in the course of Daniel, there's going to be a succession of kings. Nebuchadnezzar is the first of, I think it's 4 in the book that are going to be talked about.
I think frequently and repeatedly through history, God admonishes the Jewish people using invading forces of other folks that are allowed to conquer the Jews to teach them a lesson. I think that happens again and again. They get out of covenant, and then all of a sudden, here come the ravaging hordes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So God using these other kings and their military might, whatever, right?
I think God gets blamed for it anyway. I mean, think about it, well, at the beginning of this book, the king of Judea was handed to Nebuchadnezzar. As in God gave Judea to Nebuchadnezzar. So, and you can look at some of the interesting things that David did, but it was always God's fault. David committed genocide, he committed war crimes, he committed adultery, murder, but it was always God's fault. So I think that's just a tradition of the Old Testament.
Very much so. When they lose, it was because they weren't acting right. When they win, it was because God was rewarding them.
Yes.
I think we still do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We will pray for someone to be healed. If they aren't healed, then that was God's will. And if they are healed, that was God's will. And so I always get mixed up with our own will, or God's will, what is bad and good is all God's fault.
All right, so this is not in our book, but this is the thought that's occurring to me at this point. How do we compare and contrast that with the message that Jesus brought in the new covenant?
Well, Jesus said that the rain fell on the wicked and the good alike, and things happened to good people as well as bad people.
It's like when the rock fell on the man, is what I always think of. Jesus said, shit happens,
Yeah.
Yeah. But what are we called to do?
Love everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're also called to have faith in God. He's always with us. So during the bad times, he's with us as well as in the good times. So, I think it's part of what we're called to do is to remain faithful.
Yeah, I think that, and remaining faithful is very difficult because when you can't look at it logically, because if you look at it logically, if bad things happen to good people and good and bad things happen to good and bad people, then where's God in any of it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I can hear my dad saying, don't get too big for your britches. Don't think you had anything to do with this.
Mm.
You know, just do what you're supposed to, keep your nose clean, and life is life. I remember complaining as a young person with a job that it wasn't fair. And this is my dad's quote directly: life's not fair, get used to it. The Bible doesn't promise it. The Constitution doesn't guarantee it. And as far as I'm concerned, they ought to take that word out of the damn dictionary.
All righty. Yep. Yep.
Well, the other thing, think about it too. If all of our prayers were answered for all of our friends and loved ones, nobody would ever die.
Mm.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
And someone once said to me, who
No
was
one
a
would ever look for
biologist,
war.
just this person had just said, the reason there is death is to make room for new life.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I think of the Star Trek episodes in the original series where there was at least one place they ended up where everybody lived forever, and they were having to figure out how to deal with all that. Yeah. Okay, so to kind of wrap up, looking at Daniel's doxology here, verse 23, to you, O God, of my ancestors. So evoking the imagery of the ancestors. Who are the ancestors that first come to mind?
The Jewish people.
Abraham,
Yeah.
Abraham and
Isaac,
Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and then the 12.
yeah, go back before that. The big
Noah?
Moses.
Moses. Moses was after.
yeah,
Was after Abraham. Yeah.
right.
He was
Right.
after Jacob and the 12. Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
okay. All right. Sorry. All right. The Abraham and Moses are the two main ancestors. All right. I give thanks and praise, O God of my ancestors, for you have given me wisdom and power, and have now revealed to me what we asked of you, for you have revealed to us what the king ordered. So outside of maybe that last part of verse 23, is this a doxology or a prayer that you think you could use at some point with God? So just food for thought. All right. So Daniel is saying, hey, he starts off by saying in verse 20, blessed be the name of God from age to age, for wisdom and power are his. And he ends this song by saying, I give thanks and praise, for you've given me wisdom and power, as he prepares for this dream and telling and interpretation. So, all right, so he goes to Arioch, who was supposed to be killing everybody, all the wise men, and said, hold on, I got a plan here. I've got something to do. All right, so would somebody read 25 through 30?
Tom will do it.
Go, Tom. All right, yeah, you were muted earlier when you volunteered, so go for
Hi.
it.
Then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king and said to him, I have found among the exiles from Judah a man who can tell the king the interpretation. The king said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar,
Mhm.
are you able to tell me the dream that I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered the king, no wise man, enchanters, magicians, or diviners can show to the king the mystery that the king is asking. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has disclosed to King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen at the end of days. Your dream and the visions of your head as you lay in bed were these. To you, O king, as you lay in bed, came thoughts of what would be hereafter, and the revealer of mysteries disclosed to you what is to be. But as for me, this mystery has not been revealed to me because of any wisdom that I have more than any other living being, but in order that the interpretation may be known to the king and that you may understand the thoughts of your mind.
So Daniel's laying out. What's he laying out here for him? He's telling Nebuchadnezzar why he's doing this and what's to be expected. So what's he saying to him?
It's not me talking, it's God.
All right, that's one thing. All right. What else is he saying to him?
That this dream reveals the future.
What's ahead?
And that there's no one human who could reveal this information. It has to come from God alone.
Right. And to also perhaps bring some some comfort to Nebuchadnezzar, that that the interpretation may be known to the king and that you may understand the thoughts of your mind. And hopefully some increase his own understanding of himself. So
I thought it was interesting that he says there is a God in heaven.
And he's laying the groundwork to save the otherwise people in the Chaldeans and all. Because he's saying no humans could do this. So, in other words, don't kill them. They're not, it's impossible.
Right. There's a number of times he said where that reference to this is what's going to happen in the future, what will happen at the end of days. And then in verse 29, what would be hereafter and what is to be, what shall be hereafter. And some of those are in later verses too. And so there's been a lot of debate, needless to say, whether this is a futuristic kind of thing. Is this a prophetic kind of thing or what? So I think that's something that we'll have to we each have to sort out what our perspective is on this. Daniel is referred to in the New Testament as a prophet, and when we get on into the book, there'll be more about that. But so what this dream, the meaning of it is. All right. So would anybody like to read the next verses 31 through 45?
I'll do it.
Okay.
You were looking, O king, and lo, there was a great statue. This statue was huge, its brilliance extraordinary. It was standing before you, and its appearance was frightening. The head of that statue was of fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its middle and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. As you looked on, a stone was cut out, not by human hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and broke them into pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken in pieces and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, so that not a trace of them could be found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream. Now we will tell the king its interpretation. You, O king, the king of kings, to whom God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the might, and the glory, into whose hand he has given human beings, wherever they live, the wild animals of the field, and the birds of the air, and whom he has established as ruler over them all, you are the head of gold. After you shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours, and yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over the whole earth. And there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, just as iron crushes and smashes everything, it shall crush and shatter all these. As you saw the feet and toes partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom, but some of the strength of iron shall be in it, as you saw the iron mixed with the clay. As the toes of the feet were part iron and part clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw the iron mixed with clay, so will they mix with one another in marriage, but they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay. And in the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall this kingdom be left to another people. It shall crush all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Just as you saw that a stone was cut from the mountain, not by hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. The great God has informed the king what shall be hereafter. The dream is certain, and its interpretation trustworthy.
All right. So looking at the dream, as you read those verses, are you able to see? To me, it's written so that, I can imagine in my head what that dream looked like, the imagery of that dream. All right, so we start off with a statue where the head is gold, right? And then as it go down the body, the metals change and the quality of them change. So it ends with the feet are made out of iron and clay.
Is that story the origin of the expression having feet of clay? I've often wondered what that meant and where it came from.
I always thought that meant you didn't move. You just kind of weren't willing to move along, heavy-footed kind of thing. Is that?
I thought it was weakness because clay kind of melts,
Uh-huh. Right.
I'm looking it up.
I'm looking it up too.
Yeah. I think the mixture of iron and clay clearly indicates that in God's mind, intermarriage between varying groups is not a good thing. And the Jewish people are notorious for not wanting to have their children marry outside the faith.
It says the phrase originates from the book of Daniel.
Oh.
Woohoo!
Daniel interprets the dream of Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon. In the dream, the magnificent statue, head of gold, but weaker and less valuable metals beneath, until finally having feet of clay mixed with iron.
Yep.
I think it's for talking about the story of Israel. Talking about it started out head of gold. That ancestors were one with God. And then as it comes on down of various groups, and then of course the stone not come by man is Christ. And the thing about intermarriage is talking about the northern kingdom and how that was, as Samaria, the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel, the lower kingdom hated them for intermarrying with the Assyrians. So, to me, it's almost a very close story of the whole deal of Israel.
Yeah, but then he's also saying that the head of gold is you. The king of Babylon,
Nebuchadnezzar is the gold. Yeah.
Nebuchadnezzar is the gold, which would seem like, maybe he's saying that to make him feel a little bit better about his dream.
But Harold, you've got a point.
Kill everybody.
All right, Nancy, you were saying something.
I was just laughing about, buddy, you're the gold. You're the top of the heap. that might have been a suck up right there. But yeah. I think Harold has a very good point. It is a definite I don't know what the word is, but it definitely reflects the Jewish history.
Yeah, I think so too. But but I do agree with the suck up kind of thing, because he's saying you're the head of gold, but then when I was listening to it, I was thinking like you, Harold, that it sounds like the history of Israel. But
all right, but go back and look at verse 35. because then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken in pieces and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them could be found.
Can you find much of the Roman Empire?
Say that again, Harold.
Can you find much of the Roman Empire that
A
still
lot of people
exists?
go visit the Colosseum all the time.
Well,
But as far as the
that's-
right, there's those physical, but as far as the continued actual functioning of the empire.
Mhm.
Well, all right, so let me back up to the verse before that, verse 34, that a stone was cut out, not by human hands. So what is that implying?
Christ.
Well, that again, God is in control.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. God is in control. And that stone then became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. All right. So it's getting back to the interpretation of the four minerals, that Harold, another interpretation is that it was the different conquering rulers of that part of the world. All right. That first there was Nebuchadnezzar with the Babylonians. And there's some differing opinions about this, that the four parts may have been the Babylonians and then the Medes, Medes, which one of their first ruler we'll talk about later in Daniel, and the Persians, which we'll talk later about in Daniel, and the Greeks. Some combine the Medes and the Persians, and then the Greeks, and then the Romans, in interpreting who the four parts are. But I would think it would be, if I was a Jew reading this story, I'd be maybe could be thinking about, the history of the Jewish people as well too. Yep. Okay. So then looking down at verse 45, just as you saw that a stone was cut from the mountain, here in verse 45 is referred to as the mountain, was cut from the mountain, not by hands, and that it crushed the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. The great God has informed the king what shall be hereafter. And then Daniel gives his statement of, hey, you can trust me. The dream is certain and its interpretation trustworthy. All right, so the last three verses, anybody want to read them, or I'll read them? All right. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, worshiped Daniel, and commanded that a grain offering and incense be offered to him. The king said to Daniel, and be thinking about comparisons with Joseph through this. The king said to Daniel, truly your God is God of gods and Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery. Then the king promoted Daniel, gave him many gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon and chief prefect over all the wise men of Babylon. Daniel made a request of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel remained at the king's court.
The author talks about you can't go with the time frames that are listed in Daniel. It's just maybe not accurate, not meant to be. And if you think about this, I mean, these boys would be 16 years old and given all this power. So I don't know that when it says the second year of, the reign, I don't know that that's meant to be accurate, because these kids are just kids at this point. So, it's part more of the authors pointing out timeframes here are not meant to be literal, I believe.
Right. 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 So what are the similarities you see between Daniel and Joseph? What comes to mind?
Well, he
An
gets promoted and made a favorite and has a lot of power.
Mm-hmm. 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 Right. Now, one difference is that for Joseph, the Pharaoh still let him know that he didn't bow down before Joseph and prostrate himself on the floor like Nebuchadnezzar does. All right. So that's a big difference. But otherwise, there's similarities in terms of the power that they have. And so
Joseph was given the opportunity to make things better so that the famine didn't affect people like it would have if the dream hadn't been. So he was able to have a result that improved what the situation would be
mhm, mhm,
in the future.
true. All right, so I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of similarities between this story and the chapters from Isaiah 40 to 55. So there, you can read through the book and you can see, there's a lot of similarities theologically and stuff between the two of them. So any other thoughts you want to add? Because it's 10:50 and so we're supposed to. His friends get promoted. This time they're referred to by their Babylonian names, which I guess, earlier Daniel was, I wonder, he was interacting with them as his Jewish compatriots. This time they're referred to in their jobs or their roles with the Babylonian Empire. So I wonder, I don't know if that was a factor in why the two different names were used. So anything else that anybody wants to add? All right, so
Well,
a
this-
key theological thing is that Daniel is representing the reign of God. That's a key piece of Daniel's job in all of this. So any other comments?
If it wasn't for Daniel's rise in power, that's setting up the whole deal for the Hebrews to get to go back to Judea during, with the Jeremiah. So, well, after the Persian conquering of, Iraq, or in this case, Babylonia. So, I mean, he's setting up the situation so that they can go back home in his, rising to power.
Okay.
Just as Joseph set up, the scenario to help the people. So.
Mhm. True. Good point. Okay. All right. Well, blessings to all of you this week. Hope you have a good week and see you here next Sunday.